Hello. Hi, we're Facebook Live. We're live on Zoom as well. And this is Godshots, the mental health podcast with Darlene Sperlazza.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Well, I should say it's good evening here on the East Coast. We're at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's nice for everybody to be joining us tonight. And we have a special guest with us this evening, and her name is CARRIE Patrick. And CARRIE comes to us from Weirton, West Virginia. I've known CARRIE for a few years now, and this young woman has an amazing story that she's going to share a little bit with us tonight. And I'm super excited to share CARRIE with you because she's been in a lot of places in her life. And I just think that a lot of people that listen to our podcast also just have a lot of different variables in their life to get to the part where they're at, where they can talk about Godshots. And so without further ado, hi, CARRIE, and welcome to Godshots.
Hello.
Hi there.
Welcome.
Hi. Thank you, ladies, so much for having me.
It's our pleasure to have you, CARRIE. And you know what? I would like to start off, if you could just tell our audience a little bit about your background, of kind of like what it was like for you when you were growing up, and then we'll get to the Godshot part. How about that?
Sounds like a plan. So, you know, I grew up, I was born in 1980, and, you know, my parents, they tried their best, and sometimes things were good and sometimes things were very chaotic. I was born in Ohio, and then didn't live there long, and we moved to very, very remote West Virginia, Doddridge County, West Virginia, you know, very poor, very country. It was actually my great grandparents' property, and they had been passed away for a very long time. And, you know, my dad was a pot farmer.
Yeah, all of that.
Yes. And he had a great plan, you know, and it was, you know, we lived in poverty there, but it was really by choice. He had a plan. You know, we were gonna live in this very old farmhouse. It didn't have any running water. It had no bathroom. And he was gonna, you know, grow a bunch of marijuana and you know, build a house and start life down there. And that plan, you know, didn't produce any fruit. Literally, I mean, the fruit that it produced landed him in a lot of trouble, actually. And so, you know, I have a younger brother, and we didn't really know the difference, and we're outside playing. And, you know, besides all of this, you know, this place was beautiful that we lived. It really instilled in me a love of nature, and it was, you know, some of the best days of my childhood. And we were outside playing, and there's this helicopter, and we were so excited. We were like, wow, you know, it's landing. And it did. And there were West Virginia state troopers in that helicopter, and they wanted to know what was going on here.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And that really started like a trajectory of mass chaos in everybody's life. And you know, we moved back to Ohio, and somehow my parents were able to stay out of prison, because back in the 80s, you know, it's not like today. You know, people that were growing marijuana were treated, you know, like hard criminals. And it was a lot different then. And so we moved back to Ohio because my dad worked up here in the steel mill. But it was a bumpy ride after that. And, you know, looking back, there were some good times. And right after we moved to Ohio, things were okay for a little while. But I would say more often than not, you know, things were things were not okay. You know, my dad really he wanted to be sober in his life, and just was really not able to stay on the beam. And I can look back now and go, okay, those good times that my family had were when he was putting effort into improving himself and being sober. But other than that, there was a lot of domestic violence. There was, all the things that
Wow.
come along with drug abuse.
Carrie, may I ask you, first of all, what year was this? And how old were you when the state troopers arrived? Over your
Probably
platform?
1986.
Okay, you were 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And was your dad selling these drugs to the cartels, or was he smuggling them, or how he just sold them? Was that the problem?
No. He sold it. I don't.
You don't know. Yeah.
There were a lot of people around. I don't really know who they were, but I think it was pretty small town. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I find Carrie's story so fascinating for our audience and people that are listening to about Godshots. Because, sometimes it's really nice when we sit here and we talk about Godshots and we're like the angelic choir, and it's like all heavenly. But, sometimes we are not in that spot. We may have some people listening that are in a very difficult spot. Like she said, abuse, domestic violence, drug abuse, alcohol abuse. And you're just kind of like, how do I get out? Or, that you're stuck, but you don't know what to do. And so in listening to Carrie at such a tender age, like she really did not know anything different. It was kind of like born and raised and bred in the chaos, as she was saying.
Like
and
Ozark.
Yes, exactly. And I find it fascinating that maybe she didn't find the higher power. The higher power found her.
Well, I can't wait to hear the rest of this. But
This
by
is
the way,
exactly
I'm not really quiet here at all. All of us have come from really chaotic. That's the journey. The people who need the help the most are the ones that seek it. So
yes,
that's what this show is about anyway.
So anyhow, Carrie, so go ahead and just tell us a little bit about how you got to that turning point where you stood there and you were like at the turning point. You had to make decisions about the rest of your life.
So, first of all, I came across this story in the Bible, and it's in the Old Testament, and I don't know what book or anything it was in, but it was really interesting. And it was about a guy who was building this big wall, like maybe around a town or something. And he died, and his son picked up where he left off and continued building the wall. So, I guess my perspective of the way that I grew up is in flux all the time, and things come up that kind of change the way that I look at things. And because I have had periods of time where I've been really resentful at the way that I was raised, but that kind of changed things a little bit for me, coming across that story going, I saw my dad not be able to stay on the beam, but I learned from him that that's how you get sober, because I followed right in his footsteps. Wow. And, but I had, I saw him try. And so I kind of picked up there and went, okay, well, I'm going to give this thing a shot. And so, I was about 30 years old when I started thinking about and considering, maybe there's more to life than just partying all the time. But I didn't know anybody sober. So I wasn't sure if there was more to life than that, but I figured maybe there was. And at 35, I went into treatment. And that's I think I was 35. I don't know, maybe 37. And that's I still didn't get sober, actually. Not for a couple of more years, but I started to get sober, and I started quitting things. And things started to get a little bit better, but I still had this just gaping hole in my soul, and I couldn't figure it out. And I'm going, I've quit all these things, I've cleaned my life up, and I still feel pretty rotten. And everybody around me is kind of looking at me going, I had gained a little bit of weight, so physically I was a little bit better, but mentally I was really struggling. Spiritually I was very, very immature. So I decided that I was going to take this recovery thing seriously, and I was going to stop assuming that I knew about recovery because I knew about addiction.
Good point.
Yeah, they're not the same thing. And I didn't know anything about recovery by default. But I thought that I did, and couldn't figure out why I wasn't feeling better after quitting all these things. And I've learned in my journey that it's the drugs and the alcohol were a symptom, and my thinking is the problem.
Let's stop for 1 minute. I like that. And Lydia, I think that you have a really good grasp on this. But when you talk about drinking and drugging was but a symptom of the way that you were thinking, Lydia, I know that you figured that out.
Yeah, the ism, it's alcoholism. It's not the alcohol, it's the ism. The ism is that hole in our heart, that loneliness, that gaping, deep wounded hole in our heart that a lot of us have, and half the world has it. And it can't be filled with anything but the spiritual, with something else. You can't fight fire with fire. You can't keep filling it with more drugs or alcohol. There's no pill you can take. It's a Band-Aid approach that way. You have to fill it with joy, love, humor, all the qualities that are invisible and spiritual, I call it.
Exactly.
So until you can do that part, just quitting the drink isn't going to help you. A lot of alcoholics go, I'll just quit drinking. It's not about that. It's really about the other, that gaping, wounded loneliness, that isolation.
Absolutely. Very well said. And so, Carrie, with that, then, so you noticed that you had this gaping hole, and how did you determine what was the next steps? How did that happen for you?
Well, I've had a lot of help and support, and, I did enter a 12-step program, and that has been the key that, has really opened up a lot of doors. And, in that, in that step work, was trying to figure out and trying to formulate my own conception of God. And, looking back, and, the Blessed Mother has always been with me. I had been back in 2004 when my own daughter was born. I was 23 years old when I had my first child, and the Pope died, and I didn't know anything about Catholicism. Nobody in my family was Catholic, and I remember the Pope dying, and it was all on TV, and I was just mesmerized by this. And then I didn't really follow that path though. And then I went to my dad's grave one day, and there's a rosary on it. And I'm like, man, she's been very patient, waiting for me for years and years and years. And, I went and spent a little time at, and now looking back, I've definitely had some Catholic tendencies throughout my life. But when I first got sober, I thought, okay, should I choose a religion, or should I just keep within this general spirituality? And, I was just learning to be open to God's will. And so I just decided to do that, stay open. And I opened this book one day that I had been reading for years, and had really helped me along the way. And it was called the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And I
Mm.
opened it and it said, choose a religion and follow it until you die. And I was like, wow, well, now that's pretty clear. And decided to stay open after that, and was really kind of hoping that I didn't have to be a Christian, because that's not super cool nowadays. And but I was gonna stay open to whatever God's will was for me. And I was helping a lady one day, and she said, I had a dream about you. And I said, what was the dream? And she said, well, you were at the end of my bed, and you had this darkness across your eyes. And I was in a dark place at that time. And it was right around Christmas. And she said, and she stopped and she said, and you need to pray to the Blessed Mother, because you need your mother. I was like, wow, like this is, things are getting clearer and kind of pointing me this way and that way. And I really felt like, for days, I felt embraced. I felt like I was in like a bubble or floating, or I felt, embraced. So
your mother's arms, right? The mother.
The mother.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, one thing I would like to add, because I think it just dawned on me that I didn't say this. For everybody listening, Carrie is a registered nurse. So she has an educational background in medicine. So it's just not all about religion, and slowly but surely getting guided in a direction that was right for you. And I find that fascinating, that you were in no hurry to pick or choose or to create or say, okay, I got to do this, I got to do this. And in fact, you didn't even think you wanted to be a Christian. I find that funny. And it just kept coming your direction. And Lydia, I don't know about you, but I find that when I let go seriously of everything and let God, the answers just start coming. They may not be the answers I want to come, but the answers come. You agree?
Each person is unique, because religion is actually, there are 44,000 different denominations of Christianity, and there are 90 other religions. So religion is a very personal choice. It's not style over substance. It's simply what is the most comfortable and what beckons you. And for some people, it isn't at all a religion, but it's this generally the feeling that inside you is this kingdom of heaven, or the power is within each of us. The spirit's in all of us, basically. And to me, I can even prove it through quantum physics. That the microscope, the closer you look at matter, the more it disappears. So there's very interesting things I want to explore on this topic. But anyway, you felt called by this religion, by the religion of Catholicism or Christianity, right? So let's hear more. I'd love to hear your journey.
So, I was kind of, going, oh, what are people going to think? Because Mary is getting clearer and clearer in my life, and I know Mary is in the Catholic Church. So I was hiking with my friend. We live right on the border of Pennsylvania, and there's a state park. It's called Raccoon Creek State Park, and there's a mineral spring there. And it was in the winter time, and it was really cold and snowy. I don't really like the cold or like to go anywhere in the cold. My friend had invited me out for a hike. It was just a short one. And we go into it's like a cave. It's like a big rock formation. And I was actually telling her the story that I just shared with you all. And, we're sitting there in this beautiful, in the rocks. And as I'm telling her this story about Mary, I keep looking over my shoulder, and I'm like, there's all these ice formations that have come up off of the rock from the water dripping down from the top. And I'm like, do you see this behind me? And she was like, yeah, it's amazing. And I said, doesn't it look like 100 little Marys over there? It really does. It really does. And so I actually, I wanted to just deny that this was happening and really not acknowledge it, but I had, I had shared this with Darlene that this was happening, and she was like, don't pay attention to that. Like, don't let go of that. And here's some more to read, and here's some things to watch, which is Mary TV, which was really, really profound. And I read a book called Under the Mantle, and by Father Donald Calloway. And he's a priest, but he's lived life in the fast lane prior to becoming a priest. And after reading his story, I was like, I think it's time to take this a little further, and Mary is in the church, so I'm gonna pursue that.
Wow. You were definitely given guidance. And it's so cool when that happens. There are Zen Buddhists who also feel, there's all sorts of, what I love about recovery though, is that we all hear through to me, it's God in the flesh. Everyone's speaking to each other to help each other. And that to me is the practical application of the spiritual principles, which a lot of religions don't think about. How can we do something here now? It's more about after death. A lot of religion is focused on life after death, or paying for your sins and all this. But I love the practical application of recovery principles right here and now, and applying those. So how was your first couple of years rough in sobriety once you found this, or was this the key, this beautiful spiritual awakening when you found Mary and your
So I am 3 years sober. And, I think I was 5 or 6 months sober when COVID happened, and that's been really, that was a really hard time for everybody. So yes, it was, the first couple of years were tough. But those spiritual experiences are like what keep me going. They give me a lot of energy and joy and enthusiasm, and and I know when I'm in a low spot nowadays that it's going to pass, and that usually it's a spiritual experience that pulls me out of that, so it gives me something to look forward to.
Oh, I like how you say that a spiritual experience gives you something to look forward to. I was sharing with Lydia before we started doing this, and both of you know on this call that my father passed on March the 16th. So it's really fresh, but I've been seeing the Godshots in that, and those are the things that keep at least me going right now, knowing that there's something way deeper, way more that goes on in life than just what we can see up close and personal.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things in the background. And here's just one little snippet of something that happened at my house that I thought was amazing. So, we had the viewings on Sunday, and we had one in the afternoon, then that 3-hour break, and then one coming back into the evening, right? And so I had a lot of friends and family that were coming to my house, and all the food was here and everything like that. And when we got here, I recognized a gift that my father had given me with his death, and it was two-parted. Number one, for those of you that watch our podcast on a regular basis, have heard me talk before that I was 18 months estranged from my oldest son, and he was in my kitchen. And it was like that whole family was here, my grandchildren, my daughter-in-law, him.
But he came up to you at the grocery store and hugged you from behind. That blew my mind. It was like, what?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. So, yes. And so the initial meeting wasn't even awkward because it happened in the middle of a grocery store. And it was unbeknownst to me that that was going to happen. So it's always those moments unbeknownst to us that are just gifts. But the second part of what happened in my house was my cousins were all here. And there had been, and as all family dynamics happen, things happen throughout the years and people kind of drift apart or quit talking for whatever reason, or there's just chaos or whatever it may be. And my cousins were here, all of them. And the two girls looked at each other and said, this is the first time we've been in the same room in 40 years. And everybody hugged. I have pictures with everybody that was not possible until the passing of my father. So as tragic and terrible as that event is, like as it seems, I look at the other side of that, Carrie, and like what you're saying with the Godshots and the good things that come and being led by God. And so there's always, and I'm sure, Lydia, that you and Carrie both know this, there's always times in your life when you sit back and you're just amazed at something that happens. And Carrie, I just happen to know one of your stories that I would like for you to share with our viewers. It's actually funny. I think it's hysterical, but your car, I want you to tell us about your car.
Okay. So I have been driving the same car for 12 years now. And, it has seen better days. It has served me well. And it has 172,000 miles on it. And I need to retire this car. So last summer, not only was my car breaking down, I just felt that I needed to take some steps to improve my financial literacy. I work part-time. My youngest daughter is only 6. So I figured I need to be a better steward of the resources that I have. And I started reading a book that I had read a long time ago by an author named Dave Ramsey, and some people really like him and some people really don't, but he's been really, really helpful to me over the years. And I was like, I'm gonna start doing that again. And he has some spiritual values built into his writing, and I vividly remember reading like about practicing some discipline and doing the right thing, and God will help you out, and that certainly is what happened. So I worked a little extra, and I saved up some money, and I had moved that money over to another bank to just kind of trick myself so I won't spend it. And I looked in my bank account, and there's $12,000 extra in there. And I went, wow, wonder where that came from, but I already knew even before investigating that certainly is a gift from my higher power. And I'm just so grateful for it. So I did 1/3 of the work, and then God came in and did 2/3 of the work.
And wait a minute, are you saying that it just grew, or did you have an investment going on there?
So it was actually a little windfall that just appeared. And
It's 12,000, the same number that came to me when I was newly sober, and I got this windfall of $12,000.
Oh, get out of here.
No, I'll tell that story later, but go ahead, tell the rest of your story. I can't wait to hear it.
So, I thought at first, it makes sense to just go buy a car, but I can't make up my mind. And, I've been taught that when I don't know what to do, just don't do anything. And during that time when I started, reading and trying to kind of get on track with my cash, I talked to a financial guy that was recommended to me from somebody that I really like. And I was like, maybe before I just go spend all this money, maybe I should talk to him again. So I've recently had a call with him, and I'm like, I'm just gonna hold back. So yeah, that's the rest of the story. And I can't wait to hear about your $12,000 also.
Well, I want to hear, see, I don't know. I believe in magic. I'm on a magic carpet ride. And I got yesterday in a meeting first thing in the morning because I'm thinking I was in the worst mood the night before. I was full of anxiety. I had this amazing God shot 2 weeks ago when we did our last show, Darlene, when my son called me, whom I thought I was estranged from, and he called, we talked for an hour. All this good news is happening with him. After the show we recorded 2 weeks ago. And I just felt that he was going to call that day because it was this, I had this trust. I hadn't felt so completely trusting of my higher power, which I call God. You know, I tend to go to the non-religious aspect so we can welcome more people in, but either way. And then I remembered all these wonderful magical things that happened to me, what I call Godshots. They're coincidences that are so uncanny, they cannot just be random. There's no, and even Carl Jung tried to prove this mathematically. And Einstein, they talk about random coincidence, or is it meaningful, a causal coincidence with a cause? And then Einstein's famous line, coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. So whatever you believe out there, there is the invisible harmony in the universe that is making everything grow and bloom and blossom. And you can call it what you want, but it's the life force, it's love. It's really love, the creative energy. So when I really was in the most dire straits at one point in the beginning of sobriety, I had really had some reckless damage. You know, I call it surrender, wreckage, recovery. But the wreckage part was the part that I was going through at the time. And I just had this new surrender, and I was newly sober, and I had a brand new baby. And I needed $12,000 to pay an old tax debt. And they were about to put a lien on my bank account. And out of the blue, I surrendered. I said, well, prayer works for everything else. It worked for sobriety. It worked to meet a man, believe it or not. I got on my knees and I said, I'm surrendering my financial insecurity and my pain over this terror over my bank account. And literally the next day, I got a letter from the state of California saying, there's $12,000 we found in an old bank account, but you need to prove that your name is Natasha. Your middle name is Natasha. And that's a fake name I like to use because I love the Bullwinkle Natasha cartoon. You're too young to even know that cartoon, Carrie, but it was this Bullwinkle cartoon with Boris and Natasha. And I used to put Lydia Natasha Kornilova on all my things. I'd sign statements like that before I became Lydia Cornell. And I put it on this old bank account in the 80s. And then I thought, well, how am I going to prove that's a legal name? And sure enough, this is really weird. I had used that bizarre name, Natasha, on my child's birth certificate, official birth certificate.
Wow.
I stuck it in there for some weird reason. And all I did was prove it. I had that birth certificate, sent my passport and my license, and they sent me the $12,000. So it's kind of weird, you know?
That is.
See, I think that hearing those kind of stories, and I'm just sitting here and I'm thinking, what if I was listening to this for the first time? And one of the things I think Carrie brings to the table is just the humanness.
Yeah.
The humanness of just saying, this is how I was raised. This was pretty bad. I didn't have a silver spoon in my mouth. I didn't have anybody teaching me really anything, but yet I was guided and I was carried and I was protected. And when the time came, I was taught. Now, I think people can use all kinds of it, like you said, the Buddhist, the Jewish people, the people that are agnostic at best. Everybody has some form of higher power, you know? And I think if you just sit back and just believe that the universe has you, it does, you know, and it will. It's just, I think that sometimes, and Carrie, I just think that you portray that beautifully because this has not been an easy journey for you. And so you take a step and you're like a little child. You just stood there like, okay, am I safe? Am I not safe? What am I seeing? What do I do? Okay, let me read this book. Let me look at this. Let me try this. And just one step at a time, everything has unfolded for your path, whatever your path is. And everybody's paths are different, right?
Sounds like she got out of her way and she allowed herself to be guided. It's simpler than you think. It's the easier, softer way is to simply stop fighting everything. You know how people worry, they strive so hard to make something happen? Don't make it happen. Let go and surrender. And the things that meant for you will happen. Like you were guided to certain books. You asked questions. You realized your upbringing was very chaotic. You know, your father ran a pot farm in the times when it was illegal. I mean, that's amazing that you came from that to this.
Yeah.
You got your nursing degree.
Yes.
And you got married with kids. Yeah.
Yes.
Have kids. Mhm.
Amazing.
And I think the amazing part of that is now that you've had your own children and you've been able to break the cycle of what you experienced. And I guess what I'm saying to anybody that's listening is you're not stuck. There were certain times that I would just feel stuck. Like I'm going to be like this forever. I'm going to have to put up with this forever. And not so. Not so. Every day is a new day. Every hour can be a new beginning. We don't have to stay exactly where we think we have to stay, right?
And in the seed of everything bad is something good. That's the one thing, Darlene, you know, I'm so sorry about your father's passing. We talked on the phone about it and I couldn't believe it happened after he fell.
Yeah.
Yes. God bless you. But you've been through so much this year. And then my parents died the year before, but it's still, life is in session and we can't, we're in the moment, we're in this day. What good can we do today with this hour we have, you know, or this moment we have? That's about all we have. Dwelling in the past and dwelling in, and, you know, regretting the past and fearing the future are one way to stay out of all progress. So,
Exactly. And I think that saying goes something like, if you stay in the past, it causes depression. If you get into the future, it causes anxiety. That's why they call today a present, and we should stay here and open the gift.
yeah.
Just let it happen. Nobody could have told me that my father, and even though he was elderly, he was 90, all right? But there's different types of 90s. My dad weighed 175. He cut his own grass. He drove. He did his own thing. And when he fell on Christmas Eve, it was just a decline from there on. And could have anybody told me when I was dressing in my bathroom for the Christmas Eve party that I was having at my house at 5:30 that my father was going to call or fall? I was going to get that phone call. I was going to be at the hospital on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, miss all of those festivities completely. Like, who would have figured that? I had like 35 to 40 people scheduled at my house that night. So that's when life happens, and it's how we react to it that's going to make the difference. And I can tell you that being aware, being alert, being sober enabled me to be present for my father and my family, and to be able to sit here today without regret, because I was able to do everything that I could do. And had I been drinking, because drinking makes me very selfish, I would not have been able to be present at all. And Carrie, I think with what you're talking about, you went from being a very abused child, which is always like our child of origin stuff triggers us, right? And into a person that started realizing, I don't want to be like this. And you allowed that to come into your life. Was it easy? No, but you permitted that. And I think it's pretty fabulous.
Do you feel the craving to drink has been removed? Or do you has it? Okay. That's the spiritual part. That's the important part.
Yeah,
So,
it's gone. I recently quit nicotine, and it kind of, well, it's been a year now, and that is a difficult craving to get rid of, but it kind of reminded me, and it's Lent right now. So, and it seems like every Lent season, you know, I'm giving something up, I'm sacrificing something. And it reminds me that is really difficult to do. It's really difficult to overcome any type of craving, I believe, for me anyway.
And a lot of that's social media, it's being liked, being approved of. all that weird stuff we do as women to try to be cute, and make our butt smaller and all that. But and I remember when I quit smoking my first year of sobriety, it was after I found my brother's body. He died my first year of sobriety of a drug overdose. And I just made a vow in a meeting. Craig Shoemaker was the comedian I went to see that night, and he'll remember this story. And then I decided to quit smoking that night. And I went to a meeting afterwards and I shared, I'm going to quit because of my brother's death. But several days after that, to detoxing, I gave the finger in public to people, to a woman across this bookstore. I was giving it to my friend because he was annoying me because I couldn't find him. And I gave the finger, and this church lady that was from a church I'd gone to with the kids earlier, with my brother and sister earlier, turned around and went, "What?" It was like, you couldn't write a funnier Saturday Night Live skit. It was like, I was the biggest asshole for a few days.
Yes.
Sobriety is not always pretty,
Well, I can tell you with my cigarette story, I mean, maybe it was just the generation I grew up in, but cigarette smoking was pretty popular and I wanted to be one of the popular people. So I did it, right? And it became like a 25-year addiction that I smoked. But when I finally quit, and Carrie, you mentioned Lent, this was a 3-year process for me. Like every Lent, I was told, I was listening to something tell me to give up cigarettes, and I'd be like, no, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. Well, year 3, this is just crazy. I heard it again, that little voice in my head that was like, you need to quit smoking. And I'm like, look, I'm done with this. I'm not going to quit smoking. So therefore, this is boring me now at year 3. So I'm just not going to do anything. And I walked out of there and I thought, okay, I'm not doing anything for Lent. Well, that lasted for maybe a week. And then I woke up with a stiff neck. And I couldn't move my neck, and a friend of mine checked it and said, you need to see your doctor because you've got a hot node. So I went to my doctor, and I had one hot lymph node in the back of my neck, which just means it was swollen. And so he puts me on a 10-day course of a very strong antibiotic. I go back into this doctor. He checks me again. He's like, well, this didn't go away. He's like, so you're a nurse practitioner. He goes, what would your next step be? And I sat on that table and I'm looking at this doctor friend of mine, and I said, well, I would get a chest x-ray. He goes, why would you do that? And I said, because this is indicative of lung cancer. And he's like, that's correct. And he goes, I'm going to give you a slip for an x-ray. So I said, no. And I'll never forget this. It was April 19th at 9:15 a.m. in 2009. That's how serious this was to me. I can remember the date. And he had an x-ray machine in his office. And I said, I want you to do this. And he came back to x-ray me. And after he did that, I'm standing alone in the x-ray room. I could have read my report, but I didn't look at it. And I just remember hearing a voice from the corner of the room, very kind, but very firm, say, I told you to quit. Now quit. Wow. I felt like my knees were going to buckle. And that was the last cigarette I had in my life, was before I got to that doctor's office, because I knew whoever said that to me was not joking. Wow. Time's up. It's time to quit. I've never had a cigarette since. And it's funny because the doctor called me about 4 months later and he said, are you still not smoking? I said, I will never smoke again. I said, you have no idea how I felt in that x-ray room. I said, I called it a come to Jesus meeting. And he said to me, he goes, tell me the story again. So I did. He goes, well, I'm going to go back there and set. He goes, because I need some advice. So it touches people, but if you're open to these things, I've heard the voice. I mean, I'm not crazy. I'm not schizophrenic. I don't go around hearing voices, but I mean, I've heard the voice talk to me. I've been led and guided, just as Carrie is saying. And I agree, Carrie. I think it's a fun magic carpet ride, if you will, Lydia. It's awesome.
Fun. If you look at this life as an adventure, and if you also go for the positive. I wrote something down the other day. What was it? Look for the benefit. Give everything the benefit of the doubt, and start. Oh, let me find it. I'll look it up. But anyway, if you just try to see that you can create magic, if you start to look for the good, if you seek the good, it's like a game almost. Instead of going to the default of being depressed or panicking or paranoid or thinking the worst of everybody, that's too easy. The fun is actually created because you create your own reality by your thoughts. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what it says in many parts of the Bible. Think on these things, whatsoever things are good, whatsoever things are pure, true, beautiful and good. Think on these things. Even in Krishnamurti said that. It's like, it's in every religion. And the golden rule, by the way, is in every religion too.
That's true. That's true. It is. Yes.
So good creates it and propagates itself. So I look for I had this magical thing with a butterfly and a peacock when my husband left and my marriage crumbled and I felt like I was living in a haunted house. And I thought, I'm losing my stepson. I'll never see him again. I was grieving. And out of the blue, I had this bizarre experience with a butterfly. I didn't believe in anything like that. And I never looked up. But I went and sat under a fig tree we had in our front yard. And I never noticed we had a fig tree. That's how unconscious I was in that marriage and raising little boys. And I was sober here. So a lot of my growth happened after sobriety. But it's levels of growing, falling up. And I looked up and I saw this fig tree. It didn't have any figs on it. But by the end of that year, it was full of figs. My life had come to fruition. The fruit the tree bore fruit because I went through so many changes that year through a very dark hallway. And I started waking up, second big wake up of my life. And I started looking for beauty, and a butterfly literally circled my head. And a butterfly represents a spiritual plastic surgery. If you think about it, out of this cocoon, it's pushing itself out in this ugly, and then it becomes this beautiful winged creature with this calligraphy. Who could design something that beautiful? And these two butterflies were like circling my head that day, and they snapped me out of my grief. And I began chasing butterflies. And then I had an adventure that a month later, helping autistic children at a fundraiser in Del Mar, and they gave me a gift to go to the San Diego Zoo. And I was delighted all day long. And that day, I had so many magical coincidences. And I realized a lesson that the universe is interactive. It wants playmates. It wants to show off for us, but we're never present enough to appreciate anything. We're either in the future or in the past. But if you're here now and you're looking around, enjoying life, enjoying this moment, enjoying a conversation, a cup of coffee, a baby's face, a laugh, a prayer, truly paying attention to someone you love, that's the present moment where all the time expands. And I learned that in a really amazing way. I went, oh my God, the universe will give me anything I want. It gave me what I wanted that day. Something I really wanted to see was a monarch butterfly. And a monarch butterfly, I'd never seen one in person. And it was waiting for me when I got home on a rose. And I went, and that's all I wanted to see. And it stayed there waiting for me. And I thought, if that's all I wanted, imagine if I thought bigger, And so I started having fun with this, playing with my thoughts so that I could see the good in people. And the more I see the good in someone, the more they rise to the occasion. It meets my expectations. It's really interesting. Also, disease vanishes sometimes when I'm not the bad. I love recovery because we dwell on the good so much that we're not even thinking of our alcoholic addiction anymore, and it seems to vanish, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, it does. So Carrie, now tell me, I know that you just recently had an experience that we talked about in working the steps, and for those that are familiar, when you have to make amends to somebody, and there's some people that sometimes you just can't find, you just can't do it, maybe you just don't want to do it, and it all happens in God's timing. And I know that happened recently for you, and can you share that with us? Sure. Not names, but just the gist of it.
Yeah, sure. There was a company that I worked for off and on for many years, and they were always good to me. And I was in the throes of my addiction. I was in really poor condition all the way around. And I left there in a state of disgrace, fingers in the air, and it wasn't pretty. And I always really deeply regretted that. So it just kind of came out of the blue. And I get a message from a name that looks really familiar from this company asking me if I am looking for work. And I get it on Indeed, I get a text message, and I get an email all in the same few minutes. And I went, do they know who they're messaging? And I'm like, well, I have their number saved in my phone. So they probably, they're not dumb. They probably know who they're messaging. And so I just messaged back like, oh, I hope you're doing well. I am looking for work, and it's a really nice job. I really, I have a lot of downtime there. So there's, and it's really quiet there. So I get a lot of reading done, prayer, meditation. It's just really good quiet time. And, I figured at a minimum, if this didn't work out, talking to these folks, that I could make an amends. So when I'm talking to these people, there's hardly anybody that still works there from when, from when I misbehaved there. And, but there was one person, and, so they offered me a position, and I'm like, wow, this is working out really well. And I needed to clear up some paperwork, and was having some hesitation on something I needed to sign. And the one guy that I really needed to make the amends to called me on the phone. And I said, I have an amends to make to you. I didn't leave there. I didn't say very nice things, and I just want to tell you how sorry I am. And he said, it's water under the bridge. Don't worry about it. And I was like, wow. So I'm super, super grateful to have another thing cleared up, because while I wish that I wouldn't have behaved that way, I can't go back and change the past, but the steps provide me with the best that I can do to try to clear that up. And amazing experience. Every time I make an amends, I get super worked up about it. Of course I don't want to do it, but it's just good stuff.
Isn't it amazing how it works? It gives you a structured program to make amends, and you're released from the bondage of self. It's like, I love that part. Darlene, did you make a lot of amends? She's like,
you know what? I did. I did have to make a lot, and more is revealed. And as more is revealed, I make additional amends. And I can tell you, if everything goes well in April, celebrating 19 years, I try very hard to keep my life in such a fashion that I don't have to make amends. I'm not the biggest fan of making amends. So I'd rather just keep my street clean and do the best I can and not have to do that. But every once in a while, I get back in those old habits, and I can have a wicked tongue on me.
yeah, me too.
Yeah. But anyway, Carrie, it was just a pleasure for you to join us this evening and to share your story with our viewers. And I think it's amazing and fabulous that, we touch a lot of people with Godshots, and it's not all a bed of roses. And people sometimes can be in a dark space. They can be coming out of a dark space and think there's no hope. But you certainly gave the message tonight that there's all kinds of hope if you're just willing to take the next step and the next step. The higher power, the universe, God of your understanding, whatever you want to call the source, is more than happy, as Lydia said, to come and play with us.
And
I
to
like
give us
that.
our dreams if we stop being so negative. You are such a delightful, beautiful human being. I'm so grateful to have met you, and I hope we can have you back.
Same. Thank you, ladies, so much for having me on.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you to all of our viewers for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Godshots. Keep looking at the positive in life, the upside. We love you very much.
Have a great night, everyone.
Okay. I'm going to shut down Facebook Live.